because in every industry there are winners and losers. And so the idea that you can hand over full control to any company and have them say, we'll make everyone winners is just, it's laughable. It's kind of like if E-Trade and Schwab and the rest were like, if you use money with our stock brokerage, everyone makes money. That's not how the stock market works. That's not how the advertising market works.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of data-driven advertising. I'm your host, Ben Cicchetti, and this week I am joined by Brian Stempeck, CEO and co-founder of Evertune AI. Brian, welcome to Identity Architects.
Hey, Ben, thanks for having me on, and good to be here.
I'm super excited to learn more about Evertune AI. But for anyone who doesn't know you, can you just give us a quick introduction to yourself and a very quick introduction to Evertune AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, CEO and co-founder of Evertune AI. What we do is we help brands understand what are the different AI models like ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini saying about their brands and their products. What are they telling consumers? Are they recommending them or not? And then more importantly, what can the brand do about it? So how does a brand use content, communications, PR, advertising to actually inform and influence the AI models? Prior to this, I was part of the early team at the Trade Desk, was there for 11 years from pre-IPO through post-IPO. And so I've been in the ad tech, martech space for a long time.
I love that. And how you appear in AI is something that's front and center of every marketer's mind right now. We all used to be obsessed with being above the fold in Google. Now we're obsessed with being positively represented on all these different LLMs. So yeah, I think what you're doing is super interesting. I'm really interested to dig into it. But we'll start with our rapid fire questions designed to get to know you a little bit better. Starting with, what is your earliest memory of advertising?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I actually used to collect Absolute vodka ads. And if you remember those, it would have be like it'd say Absolute Los Angeles, and it would have a pool in the shape of an Absolute vodka bottle. And I wasn't drinking vodka at the time as a 9-year-old, but I thought it was cool that they would do these for all these different cities and descriptors and words. And I started to collect them. And so I had probably 100, 200 Absolute vodka ads that I collected, which is kind of an early tell that you're interested in advertising. I worked with a career coach at one point many years ago, and he pointed out, that's pretty weird that you were doing that. That's an interesting indicator that maybe you're interested in marketing and advertising.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm a big fan of Absolute's marketing approach. So I think that's super interesting. So when you take yourself back to that, then obviously maybe from an early age, it was clear you were going to end up in advertising. But what did you want to be when you were younger?
When I was younger, I think like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a baseball player or a fighter pilot, usual kind of 9-year-old, 10-year-old stuff. When I got a little bit older, I thought I might want to work at a creative agency and go be like kind of the Don Draper side of things, doing the creative side. And actually, my first job in advertising and marketing, I interned for an ad agency in Boston, no longer there, called Clark Goward, where I was, this was back in the late 90s, and I was designing websites for regional advertisers and things like that. But it was my first exposure to more of the creative side. And so kind of caught the bug then.
Yeah. What do you think drew you in then? Was it the creativity that drew you in, clearly from collecting those ads? But what do you think kind of keeps you in it to this very day?
Yeah, I'd say I'm really interested in the intersection of creativity and how people are influenced. So the psychology of how advertising works.
Yeah.
When I think about, how do you influence someone, whether it's AI or not, what changes their mind, what ads, what content, what things shape you to make a decision about a new car you're buying or something else. I think it's such an interesting problem because I saw this in my days at the Trade Desk, where on the ad side, you can measure every interaction with an ad, every ad that was viewed, what people clicked, what websites people went to, but you never quite have the whole story, right? You can get directionally closer to what's having influence, but it's not perfect. And I think that's really interesting to me as a really hard problem to solve. How does someone make a decision to buy a car, one of the biggest financial decisions in their life? And how do you understand as an advertiser what's going to influence them, what creative has impact, what content, what influencer does, and then some of it's just unknowable. Like my grandfather used to rebuild Chevy engines in his garage. And so I don't drive a Chevy myself, but if I was going to buy a pickup truck, I'd probably buy a Chevy. That's just unknowable, right? That's unknowable from a kind of a data standpoint. And I just think it's so interesting to think about the series of events or experiences that shape someone's perceptions about products and brands and really anything in their life.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's fascinating. And obviously, in your career, your time at the trade desk, and now where you are, what advice would you give to someone that's just starting in their career in media and advertising?
I think the best thing to do early in your career is be in a job where you get exposure to lots of different types of brands or clients or different roles you can take. Um, that could be working in an agency. I think that's a great job out of college. That could be working in ad tech or a martech company where you're working across clients or publisher. But I think getting exposure to how different marketing teams think about things is interesting. Earlier in my career, coming out of business school, I worked in consulting. Kind of same idea. You rotate from one client to another every 3 to 6 months. I went from pharma marketing to container shipping to operations inside an insurance company. Like you get to do a ton of different stuff. And then you start to figure out what do you gravitate towards? What are you good at? What's interesting? I would say, I think for a person straight out of college, it's not really the time to go in house at a brand yet. It's better to sample the world a little bit and see what it's like doing different roles. Because I've seen people who have jumped from agency to ad tech, back to agency, in house at a brand, and get that deeper breadth of experience. I think that makes them better at their jobs.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really, really good advice. A two-part question for you. What keeps you awake at night? So I guess what's the stress factor? And then what gets you up in the morning? What's that motivational factor?
Yeah, I mean, Evertune's a venture-funded company, so we're living on the edge a little bit, where you raise money, you're burning, you're trying to grow as fast as possible. But what really keeps me awake is in some industries I've been in, you have a period of time where clients are gradually adopting to it. So programmatic advertising is a good example. When I started at Trade Desk, it was in 2010, and it took a number of years for the entire advertising industry to really understand and grasp the value of programmatic because it's complicated technology. In our space in AI, it's kind of the opposite problem. Every brand on the planet right now is thinking about how is AI going to change my business? Are people still coming to my website? How are they learning about our product? Are they going to be more likely to switch to a competitor? Like, there's just a huge amount of disruption happening right now. And so we get this enormous amount of inbound demand from clients. And so, as the CEO of a fast growing tech startup, it puts me in a different position than I would normally expect to be in, which is I don't really have to go out and convince people that this is a valuable technology or this is important. It's more about how do you scale to meet demand. Well, it's a champagne
Yeah.
problem, but
It's yeah, 100%.
it is a problem nonetheless to figure out how do you scale to meet, because AI is just growing. The whole industry is growing
Yeah.
much faster than even the early days of the internet back in the dot-com bubble. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what keeps you up at night. Um, and then for like what kind of gets me up in the morning and motivates me, I really love building new tech. Part of the fun part here is you get to build new things. And because the AI models are changing so quickly and the types of things they offer, what data sources they're training on, what they're doing for consumers or for businesses, we're constantly in this game of catching up to what they do. And that makes it energizing and fun. This is a very fast changing industry. And so having the engineering team and the product team to go build the things to follow that is super fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. Super exciting. And I think what's so interesting about AI when you compare its impact on advertising to other movements, like you mentioned, programmatic, consumers weren't touching programmatic. No consumer was playing with a
Right.
DSP or an SSP, right? But every consumer right now, or a very large percentage of consumers, are playing with ChatGPT, with Gemini, and with other AI models. So it's a super interesting problem where consumer behavior is catching up as quickly as industry behavior, which is quite an unusual ratio. It's normally kind of we're pushing people that way, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, because I think the when every marketer themselves is using a tool, whether that was Google search, whether that
Yeah.
was using Instagram or TikTok, they see the value of that as a marketing channel much faster than something like programmatic, just more behind the scenes. And so
Yeah.
I think with AI, when your typical CMO is having exposure to Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, they're looking at this and thinking, "Uh-oh, there's big changes coming for my business," and that creates this, I think, moment of vulnerability for them to figure out what they need to do next.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why companies like you exist to help them know what to do next.
Yep.
How would you describe what you do within media and advertising and now AI to a 10-year-old?
So I have the benefit of having one of these at home. So I have an 11-year-old
Okay.
daughter and I have a 7-year-old. So I do this a lot to try to explain what I do. Mostly they're interested in whatever merch they can get. Can they get like an
Yeah.
Evertune shirt or hat? But the way I describe AI to them, because they're not using it yet, is super Google. They know what Google is. And so this is kind of a click beyond Google where it gives you lots of answers. And I'll occasionally show them an example of how it works. I don't want them using it for their homework or anything like that yet. It's too early. Um, the way I explain to them is that this new super Google has really strong opinions about what it recommends when they're thinking about like they want to get a new pair of shoes for back to school or they want to get a new tennis racket. What's the right product to get? This is a good place to look, and it gives pretty good recommendations. And they, again, to your point earlier, of people who are using this, they get that right away. So this is
Mm.
very understandable for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think that's a great way to describe it as well. The final of our rapid fire questions is a personal favorite of mine. Not so much of every guest that I speak to, but it's my favorite. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
I sometimes use this as a an interview question, so we're on the same page. When I'm interviewing people to join the company, I grew up as a huge kind of grunge alt rock fan, like Pearl Jam bands like that. But something a lot of my people don't know about me, probably a lot of my friends, is I love hip hop. That's mostly what I listen to now, and so I'd say "Public Service Announcement" by Jay-Z is one of my all timers, and so that's my go to.
I love that. That's an amazing, amazing song, and I'm super happy because I'm a massive Jay Z fan, and I think this
Oh,
might be the
nice.
first first Jay Z song that I get to add to our Identity Architects playlist now. So
Oh, there we go. I love it.
you've made my day. Let's dig into Evertune AI because I'm super fascinated by the company, especially as a marketer who is spending a lot of time thinking about how does the InfoSum brand appear in ChatGPT, Gemini, and other things. Launched in 2024, quickly raised 4 million in the seed round. What was the catalyst that inspired you to launch the company, and how has the kind of early momentum you've seen shaped the strategy so far?
Yeah. So it started. We started the company about a year and a half ago, and myself, my two co-founders, Ed and Paul, who are also both former Trade Desk, among other things, we were all using AI ourselves. So it came from
Mm,
that consumer background of I was looking for like a backyard grill at the time, and so I was starting to more and more move my searches to ChatGPT and Perplexity to get recommendations about what grill to buy, and then I was looking for a new car, and Ed and Paul were having the same experience. And all of us had that light bulb moment of a lot of what was happening in AI at the time was companies were pitching marketing teams and marketers about using AI for efficiency, for
mm,
workflow, for cost savings, things like that. And we took a different lens to it, which was that's all true, but this is also going to change how consumers learn about a brand and do their research on different products. And because I think in our own behavior, we saw I today probably use Google and AI tools half and half. So I'm using ChatGPT or Claude in equal installments, and I think that's happening in a lot of places.
yeah.
So we were seeing this from the consumer standpoint. So we built a prototype. We started showing it to brands, and we get this immediate validation. And so what a good example was, we're just meeting old friends and connections in the industry, and so we were meeting with a luxury fashion brand. And so we ran the
Mm,
analytics. We're asking thousands of questions to the AI models to understand what does ChatGPT think about this brand? What does Gemini think? And not just like, is it recommending the brand, but like, what does it think the brand is good at and bad at? What does it think the strengths are versus competitors? So this detailed analysis. Now, the tricky part of that is when you present that to a client, sometimes it's wrong, right? It's not necessarily what they're used to seeing, what they're used to
yeah.
seeing market research. And we're saying this is not market research. This is what ChatGPT at scale thinks about your brand. So it might differ from your market research. So we presented this one luxury fashion brand, and one of the findings was the quality of their shirts was terrible, according to AI. Like really, really bad. Way worse than competitors, like near zero type
Yeah.
scores. And so we're always kind of presenting this in a very nervous way, like, don't shoot the messenger, right? Um, but it turned out they had been seeing the same thing internally. So their own
Mm,
market research and focus groups and work with consumers have been surfacing the same thing, but they hadn't seen it on the internet. They hadn't seen it elsewhere. And so it was immediately validating that AI had gleaned this from what it read on the internet, user reviews and everything else. and it validated our technology. And so that was things like that were a very important first validation step for us. But then the immediate feedback we also got was, hey, these insights are cool, but we have lots of insights as a brand, right? Most marketers are kind of overwhelmed with insights. The more important piece to us, and we heard this from a bunch of the early customers, was what do we do about it? Can we
Mm,
influence the AI models? What action steps do we take? Because if it's just insights, like that has some value, but not as much as the rest. And that was a good moment for us to go start building out how do we help brands think about that? And so we built out a bunch of tools to figure out what websites, what publishers, what data sources are the AI models learning from? So how do you trace that back? And because as a marketer, then you think, well, who should I do my media buys with?
yeah.
Where should I focus PR communications? Where might I do affiliate? Where do I use influencer? And you can overlap those two things to not only influence consumers, but influence the AI models as well. And so we built that. And then we built a step further, which is we started giving marketers tools to figure out here's what to talk about. If the model thinks that the quality of your shirts is really bad, you may need to change the subject and lean into a strength. Or when you make changes to your manufacturing process, that's information you need to put into the models as quickly as possible to reverse that perception. And so, broadly speaking, the way I think about it is like in my previous world at Trade Desk, it was all about data driven advertising, using cookies and IDs and everything that InfoSum does to help figure out what's the right user to target with this ad, what's the right message, all the greatness of programmatic. In our world, we think of it as data driven communications, data driven PR, data driven content. What do you talk about in order to best influence the model? And that takes the content PR content teams in a new direction. And so that's really where we focus. And that was the moment where we said, we've got something, let's go raise money and scale this.
That's super interesting. I'm curious to know who within the organization, I guess, would be the main champion for something like Evertune. Is it the same team that would have been concerned with SEO and SEM a few years ago, or is it an entirely different content focused team?
It depends on the brand. Sometimes, often the user, the person logging in
Mm,
our platform, because it's self-serve, is an SEO person, search, insights, analytics,
mm,
sometimes the content team as well.
yeah.
But often the buying decision or the early champion is the CMO, the VP of growth, because
Mm.
again, they're thinking big picture and they're getting pressure from the CEO and from their board asking, are we prepared as AI search takes over, like these macro trends that are happening? And so they often understand this problem right away, which isn't always the case with ad tech and martech, right? There's
Yeah.
plenty of CMOs who, if you started asking about what CDP or DSP or
Yeah.
other things are you using, they're not as deep on that. For whatever reason, in this category, they tend to get more involved. They're not the practitioner, but they are often an early champion for using the technology.
Yeah, I love that. It makes total sense. Obviously, you mentioned that you founded Evertune alongside a couple of your colleagues from the Trade Desk.
Yeah.
How did that experience at the Trade Desk, one of the giants of ad tech now, shape your approach to Evertune and kind of generative AI analytics kind of more broadly?
I think in two ways. One is from a strategy standpoint. I was running a lot of the commercial teams at Trade Desk in the early years, and we focused really heavily on powering agencies because what we saw was that champion in programmatic at that point was the media buyer, the media trader inside of the agency, and so we would go build tools for them, and then selfishly for Trade Desk at the time, the other motivation was, hey, if you get to an agency, you can get to 50 or 100 or 1,000 advertisers with a much smaller sales team
Yeah.
by selling to this distributor channel. And so we take some of that same approach here, which is we work with some brands directly where they have in-house content or in-house SEO and things like that. We also work with lots of agencies. And so we work with agencies to help them go tell this story to lots and lots of clients because this transition as AI becomes a much larger marketing channel will play out over the next decade. And we can't be the only ones telling that story. And so I'm a big believer in the smartest people in marketing are often at the agencies. And so the more that you can power them to tell this story and give them tools to do this, the better. So that on the distribution channel, that's one. The other thing I think Trade Desk does so well, even today as a much bigger company, is its agility. And
Mm,
so, because we're in a very fast moving space, again, even faster than programmatic, our product team has to be really agile in shipping new features. So, like a couple examples, a number of months back, there's all this news about DeepSeek. coming out as an AI model, very low cost, large language model that was performing as well as ChatGPT, started picking up consumer usage. And so we integrated that within a week. And so we were one of the first companies to ever do that because we're working with global brands. They have plenty of customers in China and Asia that are using DeepSeek as their primary platform. Or another example would be more recently, in some of the AI models like ChatGPT and Perplexity, you can now do shopping. So if you said, what's the best coffee maker under $150, it'll not just surface what brands it recommends, like Mr. Coffee or Cuisinart. It'll say, here's where you buy it and provide a
Yeah.
link to click and go buy that at Best Buy or at Kohl's or Amazon or whatever else. And so we've started building shopping analytics into our platform. And so because the space is moving so fast, that agility is really important. We can't sit around thinking, here's our product roadmap for the next year. We know our product roadmap for like next 3 weeks. It's moving pretty fast.
Yeah, and I think that's right. You've got to be able to move quick. You've got to be able to react quickly. As you say, I think about my own behavior now, and arguably ChatGPT is now my go-to search tool, if I
Yeah.
or knowledge gathering tool, right? Like, so the exact example you just gave, we literally recently bought a new coffee machine at home, and I used ChatGPT to, I put in the one that I had already, and I gave it a bunch of information about what I was after, and it surfaced the one we ended up buying. So I think that behavior is so important. And AI is moving so quickly. I think there's a risk anytime we talk about AI with the product feeling like vaporware, right? Because
Yeah.
everyone is now claiming some level of AI. So can you share from what you've done already at Evertune, maybe like an early brand success story that's helped them kind of improve LLM perceptions of their brand?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that's with a lot of brands we work with, they're focused on ROI. They're focused on how do we actually move the needle for our business. So we had a software company recently. This is in B2B software. That's been a big early adopter channel for us. There's a few categories like that where clients have been fast to use our tech. It's a healthcare, pharma, automotive,
Yeah.
B2B, SaaS. Really, the common theme is they're high consideration categories. They're places where people go to do research before they make a choice. So, anyways, for this B2B SaaS company, they have a really strong product. They're doing really well as a business, but they weren't showing up in the top 10 recommended brands from ChatGPT and from Gemini and everything else. And so, in this case, we go a click deeper. We analyze, well, why is the AI model not recommending them? And what we figured out was the AI models think that security in their space was the security of the software tool was one of the most important factors. And it wasn't that they were bad at it, it was that the models didn't have much information about it. There's plenty
Mm.
of areas that are kind of blank space for the AI models where they don't have enough data to train on, so they don't have an opinion. And that was the case for this brand. So they used our tools, they figured out they weren't ranking. We gave them an indicator of here's 5 or 10 publishers that really matter. These are the sites that the AI models are reading to
Yeah.
build their opinions. You can pick up on that from the citations and the sources that the models give. And we've done a bunch of proprietary research to figure that out. So we give them that list of publishers, and then we tell them what to talk about. So in security, here's some messages to consider. Here are the keywords to use in your content. And we give them this data-driven content and comms strategy. They took action on it. Their PR team went out. They put out like 4 or 5 different blog posts. They were very detailed on their own site. The PR team got 4 or 5 articles in some publisher sites, and they broke into the top 10. It wasn't overnight. This isn't like search where
Yeah.
you can get one kind of backlink and things change overnight in Google. The models take time to retrain. It took about 2 months. But this is a meaningful difference to go from not showing up in a search in this category to now breaking into that above the fold. And so that's the kind of thing we're trying to prove out with clients is that the models are movable, like and particularly when they don't have depth of content on a given area.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating to me as a marketing leader at a B2B tech company. I just think it's fascinating to think about how do you surface that information and also the fact that it's such a practical solution that you're offering, which is here's the content plan, here's the commerce plan. As a marketer, that's kind of gold dust to be able to kind of act on it so quickly.
Yeah.
Obviously, with AI, there is a lot of hype around it. Some of it justified, maybe some of it not so much. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of how AI is going to impact our industry?
I think it's a great point because like a few years ago, I remember we went through the blockchain hype
Yeah.
cycle, right? And everyone was saying everything's going to be on the blockchain, and And at the time, I was kind of like, maybe, let's see. I don't think it didn't come to fruition, at least not yet in many industries, because I don't think a lot of consumers or businesses saw the immediate value of that. And so I think that sometimes happens. I'm picking up on that now when you hear a lot of talk about AI agents. So
Yeah.
for people who are in this kind of AI world, this is constantly coming up. This concept of an AI tool or agent or assistant that can do something for you, whether you're a business or a consumer. But I think the problem is the average person has no idea what that means. We don't
Mm,
have agents in our, it's not a thing you and I use typically in our everyday life. It kind of sounds like corporate jargon you see in like a B2B Super Bowl ad where you're like, what are they talking about exactly? I think what's underappreciated is that how you frame this. So if you don't call this an AI agent and you say this is an AI personal assistant, and imagine you have an AI personal assistant and you forward it a couple of recipes you like.
mm,
And then your AI personal assistant goes to Instacart or Fresh Direct or Kroger, whatever grocery shopping you use, and it builds the shopping list and it puts all the items in your shopping cart for you.
yeah.
That has real value. That's very tangible to a consumer. Whereas instead of calling it like the AI shopping agent, this is an assistant that's going to help build your shopping cart for groceries, which is a time consuming and kind of annoying thing that we all do. And so I think that aspect of the real world today application of AI, because that exists today.
Yeah.
My co-founder told me about this last week that he's doing that to have an AI agent add groceries to his shopping cart. I'm like, that's amazing. I'm going to start
Yeah.
doing that. For a marketer, that's a huge deal. And this is where
Yeah.
I think it's underappreciated because we go to brands, we say it's important if you're recommended or not when someone looks for your brand. And that is important. But what's more important is the moment that an AI agent or assistant is making the purchase decision, that becomes existential. So if
Yeah.
AI is picking what brands on the grocery store shelf go in this shopping cart, if you're General Mills, that's not a nice to have anymore. That's not nice to see that you're
Yeah.
recommended or not. It's actually influencing buying behavior. I think that's coming faster than people think. We see this also in B2B. We're seeing some clients start to deal with RFPs that are being
Mm,
done with AI, where the AI agent is gathering information from lots of companies to put together an RFP for whatever type of software tool that they're looking at. And so that's how we think about this business is that it's not just about SEO or your search results. Understanding AI is going to have a much bigger impact than just that.
yeah, I agree. And I think the classic example, I think agents are fascinating in what they can deliver. And to your point, they're essentially what everyone hoped Siri was going to be when Siri first came out on the iPhone, right? Is that true personal assistant that can actually do things for you. And to your point, you take things like, and I think the classic example that gets given is travel and hospitality, is people are researching flights and hotels using those agents. And if your hotel or your airline isn't able to kind of appear high in there for whatever reason, then that's a pretty significant risk that people are going to switch from your hotel chain or your airline to using a different airline because that happens to be what my ChatGPT agent tells me is the best airline to go with, right? So
And that's what people are using it for. That's a today use case where AI
yeah,
models are great at travel. I'm
yeah.
spending 48 hours in Miami. Tell me where to go. Tell me what hotels. And yeah, if you're not on that list in that recommendation stream, that becomes super problematic.
Yeah. It's fascinating space. Obviously, right at the start of this conversation, we actually talked about what drew you to this advertising industry was the creativity, the collecting of those absolute ads. So, how do we balance the technical power of AI with the human creativity that defines great branding? I mean, are we heading towards more automation or augmentation of creativity?
Yeah, so I think when a lot of this people talk about Mark Zuckerberg saying that Meta is going to automate all
Yeah.
ad creatives in the next few years, I kind of think that's ridiculous. Is my point of view, because in every industry there are winners and losers, and so the idea that you can hand over full control to any company and have them say, "We'll make everyone winners," is just it's laughable. It's kind of like if E Trade and Schwab and the rest were like, if you use money with our stock brokerage, everyone makes money.
Yeah.
That's not how the stock market works. That's not how the advertising market works. But I think the idea clicked below that, maybe you said that for the headlines, is that Meta and other technology companies like ours can give you insights about what your creative should say. And I think we've lived through this, right, in the programmatic space where V1 of this was dynamic creative. You looked at this pair of shoes on Zappos, You got targeted with that pair of shoes as you went around the internet. And like companies like Corteo have built a great business around that. But I think there's a whole new generation of creatives coming where you can augment of saying, what are the topic areas that really matter to the consumer, to the AI model? How does your brand stack up versus others in the category? What are your strengths and weaknesses back to that luxury fashion brand that's bad at material quality? What's your counter message for that? And so we think broadly about we can provide a lot of tools to build data driven creative. We're mostly doing that in the content space today to build articles and PR and comms, but we already have clients starting to push this into creatives as well. I don't think that ever gets you the absolute ad campaign, right? That those are high level, very human, very creative ideas. And I don't think that ever truly gets replaced. But it can be augmented by saying, well, a click down from that, when you've got a consumer who knows about Absolute Vodka, but they're comparing on price, they're comparing on ingredients, they're comparing on discounts at their local store. There are other factors within that that also are part of advertising that I think machines and data are pretty good at.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also for smaller businesses, maybe early stage direct to consumer businesses, having the ability to tap into some of those tools by Meta that will kind of automate the creative, I can see the value for someone like that. But to your point, an absolute is always going to need that human touch, that creativity, because that's actually what drives it. And then you also have all the things that AI and other things can just never know about. Your love for Chevy because of your background and those things that happen, right? That you can just never record. Well, right now we can't record an AI. Maybe one day we not because of this podcast that will now be on AI.
I
And you
know.
will...
Oh man, I've created a real problem for myself in the future.
One of the other things that we talk about a lot is some of the kind of issues that you get from LLMs: bias, hallucinations, and kind of inconsistent brand portrayals. How should brands think about quality control and brand safety in a generative environment?
I think there's two ways to look at that. So part of what we do is when we prompt a model, we're asking on the order of 100,000 questions across the different models. And so we're seeing this at scale because at the edges, you'll see the occasional hallucination, but at scale, you typically see correct information.
Yeah.
A couple examples of some trends that we see. One is the AI models do not refresh their data every day or every week, simply every month or every couple of months. And so you can see instances where the model is referencing outdated information, and they'll supplement that with search data to give you best of both worlds. But we'll often see these patterns emerge where one company acquires a brand 2 years ago, but the models have so much past data referring to both those as separate brands that they will keep referring to the now defunct brand name even
Yeah.
today. And so, because it's a tricky thing, because the model's trying to get to the right answer, and it's got a billion words saying this is the former brand, this is the brand name, even though that brand name doesn't exist anymore. And so, we've started to talk to marketers actually about there's more risk to rebranding than there was a year or two ago because the models take time to relearn, and you've got this huge amount of data where they've associated your previous brand name with a bunch of descriptors. So we'll just take Chevy as an example. So if they're taking Chevy and they associated that with horsepower and towing capacity and Silverado pickup trucks and all these different descriptors, if you get rid of that brand name, you also get rid of those associations. And so
Yeah.
rebranding is more fraught than it was today. The other thing we see happening a lot is the bigger issue with most of our clients is blank space, where the model doesn't know about a topic area or the brand is preventing the model from knowing about that topic area. And so what often happens, one of the first things we talk about with clients is often, hey, you're not showing up well in the rankings. Step one, do you let AI read your website? And in many cases, brands don't, or they block off certain pages, and they don't even know they're not doing it. And this happened in
Yeah.
the early days of Google search too. So allowing the crawlers to read that information. Or there's a lot of good content they have that sits behind either a paywall if you're a publisher, where you have good reason to want to separate that out and have a deal with an AI model. Or if you're a brand, it can sit behind a login or some kind of sign up form. Like if you're a B2B, you want to go download that white paper. Well, the AI model is not going to log in and download the white paper. So
Yeah.
how do you get that content to the model to give as much chance of knowing as much about your brand as possible? And so because we're in the early days of this space, there's just a lot of work to be done about filling that blank space. And I think the next phase of that is brands thinking about what other information can we push to an AI model that is brand authorized content, whether it's the most up to date pricing or product SKUs or details about the ingredients in our products if we're a food company. The more information the model can have on that, the better you show up in the results. And so that's part of the land grab that's happening now is training the models on more brand information.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing we're seeing from a kind of a land grab perspective is we're seeing more and more brands and companies rush to do something with AI. So how do we separate meaningful information from the vaporware that we discussed earlier?
Yeah. I think there's a number of companies out there right now that are a pretty thin wrapper or layer on top of ChatGPT or Cloud or something else where the core model itself has gotten so powerful that
Mm.
is that company actually adding value or not? I think it's one question marketers should be asking. The other is digging into the data. It's like back when I was at Trade Desk, we'd have a lot of clients who would want to see the full in-depth reporting feed, log level data on every ad impression you bought. And we always welcomed that because it would show the power of the platform. Like it would show how much we were varying the bids and the performance you were getting. And that was a strength for the company.
Yeah.
We take a similar approach, which is digging into the data is huge. So in our space, our smartest clients, we had a client call yesterday with a large financial services company. They were getting very detailed about how many questions is Evertune asking the models, how often, how much, at what cadence, how are you varying the questions, how much variability are you seeing in the responses, how do you check the temperature of the model, like all these really in-depth questions about how LLMs work. We're an enterprise solution, so we're working with big brands, and we expect that, and we're running 100,000 questions for every report. We have competitors who run 10 questions per report.
Mm.
So in our space, we have to go educate them to say, hey, if you're a small business, 10 questions might get you an answer. It's not going to be a great answer. But if you're a large brand and you want to understand in depth how different audiences in different geographies in different product categories are thinking about your brand, you have to operate at a pretty large scale. And so I think in every space, you're going to see this of, is this really just a light add-on top of the model, or is there true value being created here kind of beyond the model itself?
Yeah, and you mentioned true value, and that was one of the things I was most impressed with Evertune is the fact that you do give that actionable intelligence instantly on the other side of it. So, as someone that's worked in both ad tech and AI, what's the biggest challenge in making AI truly actionable for marketers today?
I think the biggest challenge right now is that, particularly with larger brands, is a question of speed, where they tend to have a lot of large market organizations can move slowly in terms of both adopting new technology and then actually putting things out into the world. And so if you have a content organization, for example, that's going through layers and layers and layers of approvals from the VP of marketing, it's going to the CMO, and every piece of content you put out in the world needs to be vetted 19 times, you're going to start falling behind in the content race. And
Yeah.
so we see brands that take our recommendations and get them into action within 30 days, or even within weeks. We see others that it takes much longer. And so I think that speed of understanding how quickly AI models have taken over an enormous percentage of search in a world where Google has dominated for so long. I think the biggest impediment is when internal processes or approvals slow the brand down from taking chances. Now, of course, there's reason to do that if you're in a regulated category or you want to maintain control of the brand voice. But if ever there was a time to take a little more risk on that, I think that time is now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's interesting, and maybe we'll bring this because we spend a lot of time talking about the marketer and the businesses, but maybe we'll bring the conversation a little bit to the consumer because consumers are also increasingly aware that AI is shaping the content they see. How can brands think about maintaining trust and transparency with consumers in this new algorithm driven world and AI driven world?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One is you hear a lot about AI slop, which is using generative AI to write an article for you, whether it's the term paper you're turning in or it's the blog post the brand's putting on their website. I think that's a bad habit. I think consumers today, at least, can tell when it's
Yeah.
AI slop, and it's just kind of generated and pushed out. we think of that space as using generative AI as a tool to build content is a great starting point, but you have to add the human voice, you have to add the brand voice on top of that and supplement with great. And that's what our clients do today. We give them a content brief. We tell them, talk about this, use these keywords. We're going to point you in the right direction. But it takes a great writer, it takes a great PR person, it takes a great journalist to actually put that into action. The other is that, you know, what's kind of ironic right now is that you have this war emerging between AI models and publishers, where in some cases the AI model licenses and pays for data from publishers. In other cases, they're just taking it and there's lawsuits over this and all these kind of things happening. And the risk to the publisher is that all the traffic is now going to the AI model and they're losing out on ad revenue. The real irony is that the AI models need these publishers to learn. And what we see in general is that they tend to bias or learn the most from the most authoritative publishers in a given category. And so if you're a brand, this is kind of like going back in time a little bit, where programmatic to some degree replaced a lot of direct publisher relationships where you could buy more at the audience level to direct publisher. I think what we're seeing now is a bit of a swing back in the other direction where if you're Chevy or you're Ford or you're Audi, those partnerships with Car and Driver, with Top Gear, with influencers on YouTube, talk about automotive, they're more important than ever because one, they're reaching consumers, but two, that information is what is informing the AI models. And there's long tail stuff you can do influence too. But what we're seeing is many of our clients are re-engaging with publishers in a meaningful way, which I think is super important because otherwise a lot of these publishers are at real risk right now. There's a lot of pain happening in that sector.
Yeah, and I guess from a brand perspective, how do you see the relationship between brands and AI evolving? Meaning, will brands start to influence AI or will AI reshape brands?
I think for the next few years, it's more of the latter, where AI is reshaping brands. We've got a number of clients who have asked recently, when they're thinking big picture, like CMOs think this way, will I need a website in 3 years?
Yeah.
It's a provocative question, but what they're
We had
seeing,
this conversation at InfoSum recently. Like,
I
what happens to them? Yeah.
think it's extreme. You probably do, but everyone's seeing right now that their traffic is declining.
Yeah.
So your web visitor traffic is declining because if I can go to ChatGPT or to Gemini and type in, tell me about InfoSum and its competitors and what makes it great, and tell me about their new products and summarize it, it also kind of cuts through the marketing jargon. It gives a more ostensibly objective lens to pull information and summarize what's going, and does a really good job of synthesizing information. And so I think that thinking through that lens of we'll still need a website, yes, but we do need to make our information available for someone else to gather and aggregate it. That's a very different approach. I recently gave a talk in front of a college class, and I asked the class what percentage of them were now using AI as their primary search, and it was every hand in the room. And so this is another class like every member of Gen Z. This is what they're doing now. This is how they're searching, and so this is coming very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Um, Last question. What is a bold bet you would make about the future of brand marketing in an AI first world? And then how is Evertune preparing to lead in that space?
Yeah, I think a lot about influence. I mentioned that
Mm,
earlier. I'm just fascinated by how people make decisions based on the information they learn. And I think over the next couple of years, AI models are going to become the single largest influence on how consumers make purchase decisions.
yeah.
And so when someone goes in the model and says, I'm looking for an SUV, should I buy the Honda CRV or the Toyota RAV4? Or should I buy Bose speakers or JBL? Or should I buy Geico insurance or State Farm? The models give a very intelligent, comprehensive, trusted point of view. And as you've probably seen, the more you use it, the more it knows about you and customize the results for your use case and everything else. And in some of these cases, the models are going to stop asking and start doing. If they're going to the grocery store site, putting products in your cart and making the purchase for you, I think over the next few years, faster than people realize, AI models become as big a marketing channel as social media is today. And so I think that's the future we're headed for.
I completely agree. Couldn't agree more. And obviously, this podcast is all about individuals like yourself, like the team at Evertune, who are pioneering new ways to deliver those data-driven customer experiences. And obviously, you were nominated to be on Identity Architects by Evan Hanlon at Choreograph.
Yeah.
So when you look to people that you admire in the industry, who would you nominate for me to interview in an upcoming episode of Identity Architects?
Yeah, I love this. So I'm going to nominate a mutual friend of Evan and I's and a true leader at the Trade Desk, Jed Diedrich, who's the CRO at the Trade Desk, who I think would be an incredible guest.
I love that. We will reach out and we will get them on the podcast. I think that would be a fascinating conversation. But this has been really fascinating for me, especially as a marketer and as someone who would classically have called himself a content marketer, whereas I think that's now just become marketing. The fact that what you do is reinforcing the importance of content and how we drive those brand stories forward, I think is really important. So I really appreciate this conversation and I really appreciate you being on Identity Architects with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.